Welcome back to the retrospective on the Uncharted series. In the past few weeks, we've explored the optional treasures, what they represent, and from which cultures they're from, and the events of Uncharted Drake's Fortune, the first title in the series, which introduces our main man Nathan Drake and his two companions, Lena Fisher and Victor Sullivan, aka Sully. Now it's time to look at Nathan's second adventure, one that pits him against a vicious war criminal with enough manpower and weaponry to level a small country, and whose obsession with the game's treasure, the Chintamani Stone, will see him stop at nothing to obtain his heart's desire. So let's talk about Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. Remember, this is a deep dive into elements of the Uncharted series. There will be spoilers. After the release of Uncharted Drake's Fortune, the team at Naughty Dog put their heads together to figure out what the core of Uncharted was. They had a first game and were building a new franchise. So to move forward, they figured out these key components that define the world and the characters. There were three key items or principles, if you want to call it that. One, traversal gunplay, meaning the combination of platforming elements and those of third-person shooters. Second, interesting characters and the pulp adventure action feel. And third, a light-hearted tone, even if the story is darker, this time exploring the themes of trust and betrayal. There should still be space for lightheartedness. Nathan and his cast would deal with the events and the heightening stakes, but still have the opportunity to be quirky and even funny. With that in mind, they set out to work, and one thing they sought to improve on was the narrative action, the cinematic set pieces. A source of inspiration for this, and which made them think they only scratched the surface on the cinematic moments in the first Uncharted, is the sequence of the truck blowing up only to become a bridge for Nathan. To push the envelope and develop the now iconic set pieces on the Uncharted series, they worked on improving their engine, so they could have characters on moving objects while still retaining their own mechanics, something they dubbed Dynamic Object Traversal System, which is what led to the creation of the now famous train level, and many other set pieces. On multiple interviews, the members of the development team stated that in the first game, they barely used 30% of the capabilities of the PlayStation 3's Cell microprocessor, while this sequel used it to the fullest, resulting in a much better looking game, but also much more advanced physics simulations, which is seen in many of these cinematic moments. Nathan's abilities, both combat and traversal, received some touch-ups to account for his growing experience, so he would be more adaptable, capable, and of course, dangerous. This includes the ability to pull up a gun and fire from whatever position he's in, no matter what else he's doing, and of course, the ability to take out enemies using stealth. But it wasn't just Nathan's abilities that were expanded and refined, but also the enemy types. Not only were there regular mooks, but others with varying levels of armor and heavy weaponry, even including some really big lads carrying miniguns. One key aspect of the development was the desire to strive for excellence, to ensure a great level of polish, but also shy away from anything that would be considered mediocre. In an interview, then lead designer Neil Druckmann stated that the director, meaning likely Bruce Straley or Amy Hennig, or both, worked with a simple mission statement of, if it's not amazing, it's getting cut. That left things that worked well, but could be iterated and even refined. And much like the previous title, this was a collaborative process across all levels, with the entire company not only providing feedback, but even executives working on the game to design and implement aspects of it. Everybody worked on this. One thing Uncharted 2 does different is set Nathan in contextual moments where his actions are restricted, such as the Tibetan village section where he can only walk and interact with the townsfolk, or the moments where he's hurt and can only limp away, as seen in the game's opening. These were done to help the audience connect with Nathan or with the place he's at, the latter especially important so that when things happen in that place and those people, the player would care about what's going on. The entire walking segment of the Tibetan village was inspired by a Tale of Tales game called The Graveyard, a short 10-minute game about an elderly woman walking slowly through a graveyard to reach a bench. It's a contemplative game about life and death, and it's very much a game about reflection. So they sought to do the same thing with the village. Give the players the opportunity to meet the townsfolk, play with the kids, pet the yaks, and create a bond with them. It was a risky move, and there were those within the team that didn't think it would work. Not only that, but they discovered that in testing, players would always try to go up to the villagers and punch them, to test the boundaries of what was possible. Another reason for the contextual change in action. So if the player attempted to punch an old lady, the action Nathan performed would be to shake her hand instead. Unlike the first Uncharted, this one had a multiplayer mode, both competitive and cooperative, for which they hired a dedicated multiplayer designer. And seeing how the single-player mechanics worked in multiplayer helped them refine them, make them more responsive and snappier. As part of their overall collaborative process, half-hour multiplayer sessions were done every single day, with the entire office invited to participate, which often led to heated discussions after the matches, and which led to them refining and polishing the multiplayer experience as much as possible. Much like the first game, the cast performed all scenes in mocap studios together, as if recording a movie. The core trio returned: Nolan North, Emily Rose, and Richard McGonigal, with newcomers Graham McTavish as the villainous Zoran Lazarevich, Claudia Black, whom I already loved from her days in Farscape, and Stephen Valentine as fellow treasure hunters Chloe Fraser and Harry Flynn respectively. And despite not having a vocal role, Robin Atkin Downes, who played Navarro in the first game, also returned, providing the mocap for Tenzin, who was voiced by the Tibetan director and actor Pema Dondup. Lastly, the late great René Auberjonois, Janos Audron himself, makes an appearance as Schaefer, the gentle German old man we meet in the Tibetan village. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, released in October 2009 to universal acclaim and multiple awards. Not to mention it outsold the first Uncharted by a clear margin, and it's still considered one of the greatest games ever made. And with that, it's time to look at the story. As with the first entry into the series, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves opens with a quote, this time from Marco Polo. "I did not tell half what I saw, for I knew I would not be believed." These words were spoken by the great explorer on his deathbed in 1324. And given the nature of his journey as we discover it in the game and the journey we undertake ourselves to these uncharted lands, I think the quote is a perfect representation of the events of the game itself. For who would actually believe even half of what Nathan could tell of the struggle for the Chintamani Stone? Speaking of which, we need to address that item. Uncharted 2's plot reveals the true nature of the stone in this world, but what about its inspiration in the real world? Well, the Chintamani Stone is a wish-fulfilling pearl mentioned in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. As for the journey, it begins in medias res, in the middle of the action. In this case, with Nathan waking up inside a train car, severely injured, his side bleeding profusely, and the train car itself dangling perilously over the edge of a cliff. So of course, Nathan has to climb his way up, taking even more bumps along the way, but proving he must have the grip of the gods, considering his hands are sleek with his own blood, which would make any climbing almost impossible. Yet he still succeeds. His reverse Midas touch, which I'll remind you is his supernatural ability to make anything he attempts to climb just break or stop working properly, does get in the way, but he ultimately succeeds, grabs some weapons, takes out some soldier types, and stumbles onto the heavy snow in a blizzard, picking up a purba, a three-sided ceremonial dagger, before collapsing from cold and blood loss. I hate this opening. I really do. Always have. I'm not a big fan of Immedias Res. Never have been. But the problem in this situation is that it's trying to connect with you that Nathan is injured, and yet he's performing feats of athleticism that should be impossible for a man in his condition, completely negating any emotional impact that you would have from seeing him in this condition. And when we return to this moment later in the story, the circumstances are gonna make this point look even more ridiculous. I consider this the precursor to the issue with the desert sequence in Uncharted 3. It's the same situation. Nathan is supposedly in a precarious position, but somehow manages to overcome it all, despite it being really impossible for him to do so. And the way to fix it is simple. Skip the train bit. Just have him crawl in the snow and desperately fight off some soldiers. That's it. But seeing him climb a pipe with his hands covered in his own blood is a stretch, even for the pulp adventure genre. But before we find out what happens next, we first need to figure out what happened before, how we got here. And we're shown that in small vignettes during this level, how two fellow treasure hunters, Harry Flynn and Chloe Fraser, found him and got him on board with a little work to break into a museum in Istanbul and get some treasure relating to Marco Polo's lost fleet. So Marco Polo was a very respected individual in Kublai Khan's court in China. But worried that if the man died, his enemies might come after Marco and his family, Polo really wanted to get out of Dodge. Fortunately for him, Kublai's great-nephew was interested in a wife and sent some people to China to find one, and the Polos were allowed to return with the wedding party to Persia, where the groom was. They left China with a fleet of 14 ships and over 600 people. But by the time the Polos disembarked 2 years later, only one ship remained, with about 18 passengers on board, not counting crew. In the Uncharted universe, what happened to the other 13 ships, they sank, is a mystery, and so there's the potential to make a killing by finding them. Harry has a client that wants a lamp held in the Istanbul Palace Museum, and hands Nathan an excerpt from one of Marco Polo's journals, something he took from the client's archives. Nathan reads it and realizes it's about the lost fleet, and the fact that the journal mentions the light of the Khan means the lamp is the clue to its location. Nathan is initially not on board, but Harry needs him after all. Of the many people who have tried and failed to break into the museum, Nathan is the only one to live to tell the tale. But the realization of what the discovery could mean, and Chloe saying, "We're screwing over the client, right?" gets Nathan on board. And as usual, the historical mystery is enough to blind Nathan to some obvious facts here. First, Harry says he took the journal excerpt from his client's files, but that it was gibberish, and he needed Nathan to figure out the Latin translation. But if it was gibberish and he couldn't read it, how did he know to take it? How did he know that this journal would be valuable? Second, they claim not to know what the journal entry is about. The moment Nathan reads it, the one who jumps in to make the connection is Chloe, connecting the dots for him. They're clearly manipulating him, but he's now engrossed, and his imagination and greed have been sparked. So he's not paying as much attention as he should. In these scenes, Harry introduces Chloe, but it's clear that she and Nathan have met, but they both play dumb, only for them to have something of an intimate discussion later on, where it's confirmed they had something, but Nate walked out on her. Still, Chloe convinces him to keep Harry in the dark about their past and just focus on the job, so they can then make off with their cuts and disappear together. But the fact they know one another is likely why she spoke up about the lost fleet. She knows Nathan intimately. She knows how to push his buttons and what will get his attention. Same reason she gets up close and personal when it's just the two of them. This is a recurring thing in the game, and I'll bring it up where it's relevant. Chloe's role in the story is the devil on the shoulder. She's there to attempt to influence Nathan to pay attention to his worst instincts, rejecting him when he does not. The three of them break into the museum, with Chloe taking care of the floodlights and then heading outside as their getaway driver, and leaving Flynn and Nathan to take care of the actual deed. And this level both showcases contextual actions, as the level is a stealth mission, so Nathan is always crouching and moving silently, and it's a departure from the rest of the game, as it's the first and only time Nathan does any gunplay that doesn't involve leaving a body count, with Flynn bringing tranq guns for the job. What's also clear as they approach is that Nathan has taken point as the leader of the whole heist, and it's noticeable that Flynn chafes at that, especially with Nathan's restrictions on the kind of weapons they can bring, and by that I mean guns. But it's curious that he's letting it play out, given that it's his job, his client, and ultimately his score. and the reason why he's letting it slide is eventually revealed when they reach the vault. They take the lamp and shatter it, revealing a blank piece of cloth and some blue resin. Then Nathan realizes what the phrase "the light of the Khan" means and lights the resin. It's blue light revealing a hidden map on the cloth piece, one that explains that the ships were hit by a tsunami off the coast of Borneo and that Marco carried something they had brought from Shambala. Nathan thinks it's the Chintamani Stone and explains as much to a very impatient Flynn, who then proceeds to climb out of the vault and take the rope with him, leaving Nathan stranded. This is why he allowed Nathan to think he was the man with the plan, because Flynn had his own, and as for the proof, he draws a gun, which he uses to shoot the display case, triggering every single alarm in the place, but not before confirming what should have been obvious from the start, and he already knew all about the Lost Fleet. He just needed Nathan for his experience in breaking into this place. When Nathan asks if Flynn is gonna shoot him, the man says no, he just needs Nathan out of the way for a little while. And given that both are aware of how bad it will be for any of them to land in a Turkish jail, setting off the alarm and shifting the entire attention of the museum on Nathan means that only one of them is gonna get caught, and Nathan's it. We skip 3 months into the future, with Nathan doing shadow puppets to pass the time in his Turkish prison cell. And it's a good thing this is the only thing we see of Nathan's time in there. I'll leave that up for you to look up, but let's just say Nathan likely didn't have a good time in there. Nevertheless, someone steps into the light and he demands for the person to move. He's interrupting the show. And Sully speaks up and gets his attention. And relief just washes over Nathan's face. Sully offers some of the usual banter and says it took all of Nathan's money and a chunk of Sully's own money, but he greased enough palms to get Nathan's release, and the two hug it out. But Nathan's a bit confused, and he wonders how Sully found out where he was, and then Sully reveals someone very special, Chloe. Nathan's not having it. Tells Sully to kick her out, get in the cell with him, and shut the door, and they're safer in there, and it's understandable. Flynn and Chloe were working together, so as far as he knows, she was in on it from the very start. Chloe shows up and she's not very enthused about the smell, and Nathan uses the opportunity to vent a bit, saying it's not too bad, he's got his own bucket, where previously he would have to share one with 8 guys, and then none of it would have happened if she and Flynn hadn't screwed him over. She tries to tell him she had nothing to do with it, but he won't believe her, forcing Sully to step in and refocus Nate on the fact they found the ships. In Borneo? Yeah, and they both confirm it. When Nathan follows up asking about the stone, Chloe wonders how he knew about it, to which Nathan retorts asking if she really thought Flynn could figure that out. It's true, Flynn is useless. It's gonna be proven over and over again for the rest of the story, get used to it. Chloe sees his point and confirms they haven't found it. They being Flynn and his client, Lazarovich, the one they call the nutcase, and Nathan doesn't even know just how much. With payback on his mind and knowing they haven't found the treasure, the plan is for Chloe to get them into their dig site where they'll steal everything from under them, with Chloe saying they'll never see it coming, unless some other form of betrayal takes place. But before that, we need a little exposition and some planning. Nathan goes over the treasure, the Chintamani Stone, a wish-fulfilling jewel, as I explained earlier. Also, according to Polo's journal, it's larger around the reach of a man's arm, meaning you couldn't hug it. So they agree it's likely worth hundreds of millions. When asked, Chloe confirms that Lazarovich paid a ton of money for Marco's journals, so his files have a lot more, and that he's been after the stone for years. To which Sully points out it's not surprising considering he has Flynn working on it. I love how the cast takes every chance to talk smack about Flynn. For one, he deserved it, he's a horrible human being. And also, they're absolutely right. Nathan says if he can get to the journals, he can find the stone. But Chloe warns him that it's gonna be tricky, considering it's in Lazarovich's tent, which is in the middle of his military compound. So Nate says it's gonna have to be an inside job, a distraction set up by someone they trust, like Chloe. And he'll only need 5 minutes. Chloe's relieved, saying she won't even have to get naked to accomplish that much, with Nathan pointing out that he meant something more in the lines of an explosion. When Sully and Nate arrive in the jungles of Borneo, Chloe has already set up some explosives, and the only thing the pair need to do is prime them, so they can be triggered when the time is right. Chloe's left a few of them along the way to the main camp. Nathan and Sully follow the trail, exchanging some of their delightful banter, and of course, immediately running into not only a patrol of soldiers, but an entire outpost. Because Nathan needs to start building that kill score by being a one-man firing squad. But it's not all shooting. The Jungle Trek also has the melee combat tutorial, which now includes counters when opponents grapple Nathan. But somehow, despite the punching and the gunfire and some optional explosions, they make it to the main camp without anyone being the wiser. Sully is ready to let it rip with the explosives, but Nate wants to take a closer look with some binoculars, and he catches Lazarevich having an argument with Flynn about their lack of progress. And those have to be some very special binoculars because they can hear everything that's happening just perfectly. But, to be fair, they have radio comms with Chloe, so they could just be listening in to what her earpiece is picking up. Flynn is doing all he can to make as many excuses as possible, but they're interrupted. One of Lazarevich's own men has been caught stealing, and the warlord handles it rationally by stabbing the man in the heart and dumping the body, then shouting that he's surrounded by traitors and fools, the latter likely meaning Flynn. Seeing this as a perfect opportunity to really sour Lazarevich's day, they trigger the bombs and use the distraction to allow Nathan to infiltrate the camp and reach the tent. And this is the first of many sequences that have convinced me that stealth is pointless in Uncharted 2. After all, even if you clear the room without being seen even once, after the cutscene, the next wave will come in just the same as if you'd gone in guns blazing. And the same is true for any other sequence where stealth is an option. The next wave will come no matter how silent but deadly you were. It's really annoying. But after giving the remaining soldiers the same warm and fuzzy treatment Lazarevich did to the thief, Nathan slips into what Chloe called a tent, but is really more of a hut. Inside, he discovers that what Flynn said was true. Lazarevich has a lot of documents and files on every expedition ever done to find Shambala, including Marco Polo's journals on the subject. The notes mention a golden passport and some allusions that the tsunami was divine retribution for bringing something from Shambala. But it's not the stone, as Marco didn't dare take it. And that's why Lazarevich is so keen on finding the city, because the stone is still there. But something isn't adding up for Nathan. It's probably why Lazarevich is frustrated with the lack of progress. Nate asks Chloe if they found bodies. After all, 600 people died here, but she says they haven't. So Nathan poses the question, where would you go during a tsunami? And Sully, very smartly, says higher ground. So the nearby mountain is their next destination. And it took them 30 seconds to figure that out, using just common sense, and in 3 months, Flynn couldn't. Yet another point on the Flynn sucks column. But inevitably, Nate outstays his welcome, and they're besieged by more of Lazarevich's men. And so we go into the final tutorial, grenades, used for both turning enemies into a Jackson Pollock painting and also blowing up certain fortified structures, as is the case with some of the soldiers shooting from a little hut with a machine gun emplacement. The grenades make short and messy work of them, and Sully and Nathan move on, meeting up with Chloe at the threshold of some kind of overgrown ruin. There is a statue head on the floor that is very reminiscent of the Ogo Ogo demonic statues found in Bali, another Indonesian island. But given that Borneo and Bali were part of the Hindu-Buddhist Mahajapit Empire, this is likely a fierce deity. And if you want to know more about fierce deities, check out the Uncharted 2 Treasures video. Inside these ruins, they find bodies alright, all of them with blackened teeth, and this is not from a lack of dental hygiene. No, this is from consuming the blue resin we saw before in the museum. It's not mentioned outright, but there is evidence much later on that this is the case. Not only that, but there are clear indications that these people took each other out, as if eating the resin has an effect other than turning your teeth to charcoal. Again, there's evidence later on. Nathan, knowing the kind of strange blue fire this resin creates when burned, grabs a nearby torch and fills it with some of the resin he finds. And we see another property of the resin. The fire acts as a black light. With blood and other fluids, shining under its light, and there is blood everywhere. Either that or these people had a really good time before they died. Following the trail, they come to a man clutching a bundle of cloth. After jump-scaring his companions, Nathan unrolls it, and inside is a purba. The same we saw during the first level, the one Nathan picks up from the snow. He realizes this is what Polo mentioned, the golden passport to Shambala. After all, purbas are tools to remove obstacles. The bundle of cloth, on the other hand, has the next clue, mentioning a field covered in temples. Only now it's not a field, it's a city in Nepal, Kathmandu. Only they never actually say the name of the city in the game. In the city, there is one specific temple that points the way to Shambala, and that's their next destination. And guess what? You need the golden passport. Chloe pockets the item and heads back out first, with Sully and Nathan following after. But of course, as soon as they reach the entrance, they see Chloe come right back in, point a gun at them, and call for Flynn, with Sully berating Nate for his choice of companions, and Nate telling him to save it. To be fair, the one who convinced Nathan to go along with all of this and forgive and even trust Chloe was Sully. So right about now, he's throwing a lot of stones in his very nice glass house. A curious thing is that we see Chloe step out, and as she does, we can see the purba is not in her possession, which it was only 30 seconds before. She stuffed the thing down her pants, and it's a hefty object. Anyone will be able to see that she has it. But no one does, because the plot needs for everyone to have selective blindness. Flynn taunts Nate, and is surprised to see Sully with them, wondering why Nathan still drags the old man around. Funnily enough, the same question will be posed in Uncharted 3, only from a different source and with a completely different tone. In this case, Nate almost jumps Flynn, but Sully stops him, considering they're surrounded and outgunned. Flynn notes that Nate's pretty daring for someone who spent the last few months in jail, but both Nate and Sully point out that it's better than spending all his time lost in the jungle without a damn clue that he couldn't find his own butt even with a map. Yes, Flynn sucks. And speaking of maps, Chloe takes the cloth map they found and hands it to Flynn. And you know that phrase, it's better to be thought a fool than opening your mouth and confirming it? Well, that applies to Flynn's Latin skills. Nate gets tired of the slow reading and tells everyone what the map says. Confident he has the upper hand, Flynn tells Chloe to take the two to Lazarevich, telling Nate he should have stayed in prison. And he'd be right most of the time, but he's allied with Chloe, whose allegiances are even more in flux than Cain from Final Fantasy IV. Case in point, as soon as they clear the ruins, Chloe takes out the guards assigned to follow her. She gets shot in the process, which is perfect to make their escape look real. She then pulls the purba, likely from Hammer Space, and hands it to Nate, telling them she'll try to buy them some time to escape. When Nate starts to protest, she kisses him and tells him to go to Nepal. Remember what I said about her knowing just how to manipulate Nathan? Well, this is, I feel, another case. A simple kiss, and he's doing everything she says, even if it doesn't make all that much sense. This triggers another chase, much like the one after the introduction of Roman and Navarro in the first Uncharted, and ends with Sully and Nate jumping off a cliff into the sea. But before they do, Sully bows out of the chase, telling Nate he's too old and he knows when to let it go, and Nate can tell him all about the adventure when he comes back. Scene then transitions to Kathmandu, which is a war zone. Chloe, over the comms, says the place has been on the edge of civil war for years, and now Lazarevich, with the local guerrillas, have just lit that fire. The chaos covers his search, but I think Lazarevich also enjoys getting his hands dirty, and someone like him, with his own army, could use this conflict as a way to sell his services and further line his pockets. After all, this endeavor costs a lot of money. Some kind of revenue stream is needed to pay for Flynn wasting his time. The local guerrillas he drummed out keep the army busy while he tears the place apart, and then once he's done, he can come and offer to take care of the problem he created. I could see someone like Lazarevich do that, even if they say that he is not after money. Being the magnet for trouble that he is, the moment Nate rolls into town, I mean the millisecond, he's chased by a heavily armored Humvee, his own Jeep crashing, and the rest of the chase happening in A, crash cam, with the character running towards the camera while shooting back, and B, on foot. But he does manage to disable the truck and proceed onto the city streets. And after adding a few more names to the casualty list, more of Lazarevich's clone soldiers, because there are hundreds of them and they all look identical to one another, come out with a truck with a gun emplacement, pinning down Nathan. Fortunately, Chloe arrives with a rocket launcher and saves the helpless prince. In this section, before the fighting starts, if you try to go around the toppled bus, it'll blow up, sending Nathan tumbling. Just another instance of Drake's reverse Midas touch. Also, curiously, to the side is a sign for Sullivan Travel, maybe Sully's side gig? Not only that, but right above is a sign for Club Raja, a reference to everybody's favorite scumbag pirate king from Uncharted 1. Chloe and Nate reunite, and of course they flirt, with Chloe commenting on whether that is a purr by Nate's pocket, and Nate saying he's just happy to see her. Chloe pulls the dagger out of the front of Nate's pants, and you realize he's been keeping a knife tucked near some very tender bits. Not the brightest idea considering how much Nate tumbles and stumbles. They recap the meaning of the purba, but Nate says he doesn't know what's next, only that Lazarevich won't get far without the dagger. Chloe warns him not to underestimate the man, and I agree, who needs special daggers where you can just blow open a door, you know? In any case, as she comments on Lazarevich's explosive investigations, Nathan notices something. A symbol on the purba matches one on a nearby archway. So that's how Marco Polo did it. The temple they're looking for will have the same symbol, so now they need to get to higher ground for a vantage point. Chloe suggests a hotel, the tallest building in the city, and of course, Nate thinks she's talking about the hotel in another capacity, which is kind of funny. And with all the flirting a few seconds before, I really can't blame the guy, though he is in a war zone. Not the most romantic or sexy of settings. But then again, Sally did say at the end of Uncharted Drake's Fortune that Nathan has a weird idea of romantic. The pair continues their path through the city, block by block, proving that Lazarevich should spend some of that money on better training for his men, who can't seem to get the job done with ridiculous numbers and firepower. Which is especially true as they reach the vicinity of the hotel, where the soldiers have hunkered down in a temple with a guy on a truck with an RPG, a rocket launcher, and even more clones coming to the party. When the smoke clears and the dust settles, and the soldiers have been turned into a Jackson Pollock painting, Nate and Chloe head into the hotel through one of the upper floors, where the elevator opens and two new enemy types appear. Shotgun lads with heavier armor and 12-gauge shotguns. And these are an actual threat, but inevitably, we leave their positions in the roster permanently vacated. And the pair get on the elevator, only for it to lose power and stop midway up. They open the doors but only Nathan makes it through, so he's got no choice but to clamber across the hotel and reach the generators, so Chloe can catch up with him. Remember those core tenets of Uncharted about being lighthearted? Well, on the rooftop, you can have one such moment, jumping into the pool, at which point Nathan will start to play Marco Polo. And if you've never played Marco Polo, it's like tag, but the person who's it closes their eyes, shouts Marco, and then everyone else needs to say Polo, giving the other person audio cues to find them. You know, I never thought I'd be explaining children's pool games in one of these videos, but here we are. Funnily enough, depending on who you believe, the name Marco Polo for the game has very little to do with the actual Marco Polo, or it's a chicken name based on a legend that says that Marco Polo, the man, didn't know where the hell he was going or what the hell he was doing half the time. Back to the game, Chloe is not amused by Nate's childishness, and with the moment ruined, they climb to the highest point and look out to the city and find the temple they're looking for. Chloe fiddles with her radio and taps into Lazarevich's communications, and they hear an alert being broadcast to all forces that Nathan's been seen in Sector 18, which is very much where they are right now. And it's a surprise that it took them this long to find them, given how many soldiers he took out along the way. But it's not the rank and file they have to worry about. It's a mean-looking attack helicopter coming their way. There is a convenient zipline atop the building, which they use to reach the more street-level buildings. And I've seen people use belts and cloth and chains and whatnot to go on a zipline. Nate is the only character I've ever seen to use a pistol, the wire held between the grip and the trigger guard. It's not just unlikely to work, but with the speeds you're on, If that shifts even a millimeter to either side, you're done. And if the fall doesn't do the job, then you'll be missing a few fingers at the very least. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments, but I'm fairly certain I'm right. But you know what? In the end, it doesn't matter. This is a pulp adventure, like Indiana Jones. Nonsense like this just adds to the flair. Realism is not the intent. As they land, the helicopter rears up on them, kicking off one hell of a set piece, where they jump across rickety awnings and balconies, clamber as they brake, fight soldiers, and even head inside a building, only for the pilot to shoot rockets at it, causing it to literally break in half and topple, everything and everyone sliding towards the brand new holes in the building's facade, and towards the abyss. Fortunately, our heroes are agile and manage to jump across the gap through a window into a neighboring building and safety. Well, safety for about 30 seconds, as more soldiers await them on the roof of this new edifice. And much worse, the attack chopper returns, and this time it's a boss fight, where you have to hit it with explosive rounds from a grenade launcher until the thing goes up in a blaze of glory. With their pursuers vanquished, for now, as there are always more clone soldiers, Chloe and Nathan continue on their way. But unfortunately, Nathan's innate reverse Midas touch rears its head again, and the zipline he was on snaps, and he swings right into the side of a building, smashing his face into the brickwork before dropping like John Wick from the Continental, including a bounce of a very hard surface before hitting the floor. I'm not saying Nate should be dead from that, but at least paralyzed. But much like Wick, he picks himself up and walks it off, though struggling a lot and groaning from the pain. Nathan Drake is no stoic assassin, though the body count is comparable. Nathan continues on his own, looking to reunite with Chloe, but it's not that leading lady he meets, but as she herself puts it, last year's model, Elena, who's A, shocked to see Nathan and wondering what he's up to in this chaos, and B, an investigative reporter looking into our favorite sociopath, Zoran Lazarevich. The best thing about this reunion is that her camera guy, Jeff, tackles Nathan to the ground, and he needs to count his lucky stars that Nathan is a good guy, because hundreds of mooks have died for less than that. When learning why she's in the city, Nathan points out that following or stopping Lazarevich is NATO's job. But Elena says they think he's dead, and I call nonsense on this. This man has too big an army and too much of a footprint in the world at large for him to be unnoticed by international authorities, let alone the myriad intelligence agencies likely on his tail. Mind you, terrorist everyone thinks is dead suddenly appearing again, or someone tipping off to them being alive, is literally the case of the first episode of the TV show The Blacklist, and they did it better. Even in a pulp adventure, Lazarevich is not subtle enough to hide from any intelligence agency or even international bodies. It just doesn't happen. Elena passionately tries to explain why finding Lazarevich and reporting on him is so important, giving examples of his atrocities. And none of them are surprising to Nathan nor the audience. But Nate doesn't show the degree of concern he should, and very much gives her the aha, like he's barely paying attention, which is enough for Elena to realize Nate has something to do with Lazarevich. He's about to try to convince her that it's not the case when Chloe arrives and pretty much ruins it, not to mention make fun of him when she realizes the history between Nathan and Elena. And this scene, as well as many others that will follow, establish the roles of the two ladies in the game. They represent, in a way, Nathan's moral compass. Chloe, the treasure hunter, represents Nathan's worst instincts, and so far, she's fed those instincts throughout the story. Nathan has had moments of at least considering letting the whole thing go, but Chloe is there to keep him on mission, to feed his lust, his greed, and the desire to show off. Elena, on the other hand, is the heroic side of him, the selfless, the one looking out for others, and her influence on him is far stronger. He may have an attraction for Chloe, but it's clear he doesn't want to disappoint Elena. And their moral tug-of-war on Nathan is a key element of the scenes in this level, and one of the reasons Chloe, again, seems to split and switch sides when she's losing. It's worth noting, though, that while the characters might have this thematic role as moral guides, it doesn't diminish them. They're still well-rounded, well-written characters, and as is constantly proven, they are Nathan's equals. But it is also true they hold influence over Mr. Drake, and that tug-of-war begins immediately. Nathan tells Chloe that Elena and Jeff will be coming with them, and Chloe's dead set against it. The extra baggage will only slow them down, putting them at risk of capture, and considering it's Lazarevich, that will be very bad indeed. But Nate is not about to let Elena be stuck in this mess on her own. This obviously frustrates Chloe, and she even tells Nathan, "Dance with the one you brought." Elena, on her own part, in a way, agrees with Chloe, but it's that they don't need saving. But at that moment, one of those attack choppers comes around and ends whatever discussion would be had. And so the reporter and the camera guy join the party as they make their way across the urban war zone towards the temple they seek. Along the way, in one gunfight or another, Elena expresses some shock that Nate is yet again in gunfights against a bunch of mooks, with Nate very much offended and pointing out that he didn't ask to be in this position, and that's a fair point. It's not every day you run into a guy with his own clone army, you know? They reach the temple thereafter, and Elena demands to know what the hell is going on. Nate gives her a quick rundown, mentioning the Chintamani Stone and Shambala, with Elena and Jeff both pointing out the absurdity of competing with a psychotic war criminal for who gets first to a mythical gem. All the while, Chloe's trying to pull Nathan away and keep him on mission, even physically dragging him away when Elena points out something critical. That Lazarevich can't be after the rock for money. According to Elena, the person who's been researching and following him, he doesn't need the money, so Nate has to be missing something. This is Elena warning Nathan and us, the audience, remember El Dorado. It's never just baubles. But as I said before, Lazarevich not needing any money is a bit of a stretch. Inside is an altar shaped like a fierce deity, and what follows is a simple climbing puzzle. First, to set the statue's arms in the correct position, opening a slot on which to use the purba, and then a gigantic room with a kaiju-sized purba you need to climb on to open a path into a secret chamber where an ancient piece of tech generates a scale model of the Himalayas, showing the location of the entrance to Shambala, which Nathan jots down on a map he has on a tourist brochure. He's not gonna have that map for long though. He never gets to keep maps for long. And as is usually the case in Uncharted, the moment he makes the discovery, the latest batch of clones arrive, initiating another shootout, which starts within the temple and spills out into the streets outside, where the soldiers have Elena pinned down inside a dilapidated house. Chloe and Nathan help out and reunite with her once the bodies hit the floor. Unfortunately, Jeff is well on his way of being one of those bodies. And here comes another moment of contention with Chloe. She wants to ditch the wounded cameraman immediately. Not a hint of concern for him. But Elena is against it, and Nate is already supporting him, helping him walk. She's with you in the next section, providing cover fire, but she's not happy with all these heroics. She's all about that treasure, nothing else. And so when it looks like they're on the losing end, with Jeff on the floor and unable to make the jump that would get them to safety, she shifts her allegiances yet again, joining the bad guys, or the winning side from her point of view, turning her gun on Nathan, with Flynn and Lazarevich joining them soon after. Flynn has the men take Chloe to the train, since she's been hurt. Plus, he seems rather suspicious of her in this moment, though his focus shifts to Nathan as soon as she's out of the room. Lazarevich takes a close look at Nathan, putting a face to the name he's probably heard a few dozen times already. He takes the purba and hands it to one of his men, before shooting and killing Jeff, saying it's a pity after they carried him all the way here from the temple. Elena wants to get closer to her deceased colleague, but Lazarevich presses the gun to the back of her head and makes her step back. He demands to know what Nathan found in the temple, and Drake tells him he's found the location of Shambala, but they'll need him to find it, and he'll help them, but Elena goes free. Lazarevich takes another look at her, and with a really scary chuckle, he acknowledges Elena as the shadow that's been following him all over the place. After all, Elena's goal is to expose him to the authorities, so she's probably been on his trail for a while now. He says she better pray that Nate is not bluffing. And remember when I said Nathan would not keep them out for long? Well, it comes into play next. Lazarevich, being a smarter villain than his subordinates, tells Flynn to search Nate, and he finds the brochure with the location on it. So Lazarevich accurately points out that Nate has nothing to bargain with anymore. And then, unfortunately, he decides to stop being a good villain and turns into a Bond villain, leaving the disposal of Nathan and Elena to Flynn and one mook while he heads back. I mean, Flynn's not exactly been all that good at his job so far. Why would Lazarevich give him this task? He already shot Jeff. He still has enough bullets to pop Nate and Elena both and be done with it. But I suppose if he acted like the smart villain he's supposed to be, there would be no game to continue playing. With that said though, and I do dislike the Bond villain thing of, I shall let my men handle you while I'm out of the room, this could be Lazarevich testing Flynn. We've seen Lazarevich take out people that displease him or steal from him, but Flynn is still alive despite being useless. So Lazarevich has to be wondering if he's more trouble than he's worth. So this could be one more test for Flynn to determine if he's worth keeping around or if it's time to cut him loose permanently. After all, one consistent aspect of the story is the deteriorating relationship between Flynn and Lazarevich, leading to Flynn's fate in Shambala. So this could be another key moment in that relationship. And proving that Flynn is incompetent, he steps towards Elena. She wonders how he can work for Lazarevich, and he flippantly replies that it beats working against him. And that may be true for him, but Nate's been very successful at it. He then tries to pull Elena up, but for what reason? Nobody knows. After all, his task is disposal, not capture or interrogation. He gets too close to Elena and gets punched right in the face. And Nate said it well in Uncharted 1. She packs a mean right hook. Elena calls for Nate to run, and he punches the other mook, and they jump out, clearing the gap that Jeff would never have been able to make, running away from a hail of gunfire in a pretty cool sequence that starts in crash cam and then shifts to regular perspective. Once they're safe, there is a moment when they relax and it seems like they may kiss, again confirming Sully's words of them having a weird idea of romantic. But they both realize it's not the right time and stop. Nathan apologizes for getting her into this whole mess, but Elena tells him it's not his fault and that she and Jeff knew what the stakes were. She wants to know what the plan is, and Nate says he's going after Chloe, and Elena is not even remotely surprised. Nate pulls out another brochure with a map of the city, finding the train depot nearby. He heard Flynn's command to the soldier and figures out their train must be nearby. Elena points out that Chloe turned on them, and might even have shot Nathan if Lazarevich and Flynn hadn't arrived when they did. Nate says Flynn saw them together, and if Lazarevich realizes she's double-crossed them, he'll do terrible things to her. And Elena confirms it, saying she's seen his handiwork before. So, Nate says, he really doesn't have a choice but to go after her, to save her. Elena gives him a dubious look, then says, "Honor among thieves, huh?" Nate says it's something like that. But the "among thieves" in the title rarely refers to honor, to be honest. It's more about dishonesty among thieves. No, this is Nathan not being wired to let someone he cares for end up in a bad situation. And given what we learn of him in Uncharted 3, how his father surrendered him to the state and his mother committed suicide, this behavior is likely due to the abandonment he suffered. So he won't do that to anyone else. Plus, he'd likely want to keep his people around safe and sound. Now, would Chloe have shot Nate? No. It was clear that she was disappointed in him, and she probably realized that the moment Elena showed up, her control or ability to direct him to keep him on track pretty much went away. It was sentimentality that kept her around, but she reached the boiling point that scene. But, as will be clear later on, any damage Chloe would want to inflict is purely on the emotional side. Elena hopes that Nathan knows what he's doing, but he admits he has no clue, which, in a way, is comforting to Elena, seeing that some things never really change. She picks herself up, telling him they have a train to catch. Nathan tries to tell her to stay here, that she's not coming on this mission. But if there's something he needs to learn, is that he can't talk Elena out of anything, so they head to the train depot together. This next level has one of the cleverest shootouts in the entire game, where Nathan is hanging from business signs, having to switch from one to another, jumping over them and changing sides to avoid enemies coming from all directions. It's challenging, but really fun. They reach the nearby water tower, and Nate takes a look into the depot, which is crawling with clones. He manages to catch the moment Flynn manhandles Chloe onto the train, both followed soon after by Lazarevich. Nate says that he'll go down there on his own, and before Elena can protest, with Nate complaining that she never listens, he points out that he needs her to go down and steal a 4x4 to be the getaway driver. And yet somehow, as they end this impromptu strategy meeting, Elena acts as if the plan was hers all along and tells Nathan to get moving. And I love the expression on his face, as if wondering, when did the roles reverse? They reversed the moment you two met. As you might expect, the infiltration into the depot doesn't go according to plan, and Nate is left fending off an armada of clone soldiers, including 2 new units, super heavies, big lads, the Lazarevich Army Space Marines, with massive armors and chain guns. As he fights them off, the train departs, and just as things are looking especially bad for Nathan, Elena comes to the rescue and he hops on the jeep and they speed off after the train. Nate's plan is only slightly deranged, to jump from the jeep onto the train. Now, the train itself is perhaps the most famous set piece in all of Uncharted. The thing they made all the moving background and platform tech for, and I hate it with every fiber of my being. And it's not anything to do with the actual set piece or the sequence of events, but with one aspect that this game does a lot and goes back to my thoughts on stealth in Uncharted. As you begin your trek across the train, you can do things stealthily, without being detected once, and still, as you move through one of the carriages, you'll get attacked by someone jumping through a window, someone who shouldn't be able to tell you were down there if you went with a stealth approach, and so that has always broken my immersion to an astounding degree and left me quite bitter, to be honest. It also doesn't help that you're once again dealing with an attack helicopter as the main encounter. Repeat bosses are never as good as the first time around. There is another boss, but it's just a random ghoul with a gajillion health and the Purba in his pocket. After you defeat him, he rises once more and tries to throw you out the window, but then Chloe steps in and kills him. Nate is happy to see her, but she points her gun at him and tells him to get off the train. When Nate, incredulous, points out how much he's been through, she snaps back that she didn't ask for his heroics. Nate, bewildered, demands to know what she wants from him, and she says to have her back. He says he always had her back, and that's true, but not from her point of view. She tells him he couldn't have her back when he was busy with the other two, and that he made his choice. The moment Nathan sided against her in Kathmandu to help the others, to take Elena with them, to help Jeff, she saw it as him turning his back on her. Nate angrily tells her good luck with dealing with Flynn, snapping at her that they deserve each other. He turns away for a moment, then as he turns back to throw another barb at her, a gunshot rings out and Nate is hit on the side, the camera revealing that Flynn has entered the scene, with Chloe whispering no, her face just shock, proving that she would never have shot him. She would never have hurt him, no matter how disappointed she may have been. I have to say though, Flynn seems to be sporting a Desert Eagle. That's at the very least a .357 Magnum, though most likely a .50, and yet the shot on Nate's side doesn't seem to have an exit wound. I may not be a gun guy, but I know enough to call shenanigans on that. There should be a hole on the other side of that gunshot. Still, I'm not a gun guy. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. In any case, Flynn steps towards Nate, incredulous at how Nate just doesn't seem to give up. Then snaps at him when Nate doesn't reply, asking what, no clever remark? No quip? No joke? He shoots again, but Chloe shoves him away, throwing his aim off. She begs him to just let him go, but he pushes her down, firing at the retreating Nathan and telling Lazarevich's men to put him out of his misery. Nate attempts to run away, but then he stumbles, his legs losing strength and his focus wavering, almost like he's going into shock. With the soldiers coming, Nathan braces, ready for the last stand, then notices the propane tanks in the corner. He aims and shoots, the explosion separating this car from the ones up front, but causing it and all the ones behind it to derail, making them stumble down a slope on the side of a mountain, with the car he's on dangling over the edge, bringing us full circle to the beginning of the game, to the in medias res sequence, only now expanded with an additional gunfight against even more of Lazarevich's soldiers. And you could take them out with stealth, but you know my thoughts on that by now. And knowing what happened right before the in medias res sequence, it now feels even more implausible. Nathan could barely run, and yet he's climbing all over the place with his hands covered in blood? Unlikely. Even in a pulp adventure, there are lines, there are limits, and Uncharted goes way past them. At this point, Nathan is a superhero. But after turning all the clones into human corpse popsicles, Nathan picks up the Purba and collapses, losing consciousness just as he sees a stranger approach him. He wakes up sleeping on a nice bed, and is immediately startled by a child standing really close to him. His savior, a man called Tenzin, approaches and tells her to step back, give him some space, and go get Schaefer. Tenzin's dialogue is not translated in the subtitles, so the player, much like Nathan, is left to guess or deduce what he's saying based on specific words like names and his body language, which is a really clever way of enhancing immersion. But for the purposes of this exploration of the story, I will be translating some of it. Big shout out to Moonable or Moonable for doing the hard work of translating what Tenzin has to say. I'll include a link to that video in the description. Nate asks the usual questions: where, when, and how. Tenzin tells him to take it slow, that he's very lucky, and to drink the tea that he pours him. He tells Rick that his friend has been waiting for him, and if he's up to it, to get up and come along. When Nate doesn't respond, Tenzin realizes he's gonna have to do a lot more gesturing, in this case for him to get up. He hands Nathan his new look for the rest of the game, a very thick jacket, and bids him to follow, that Schaefer's been waiting for him to get up to talk to him. They step outside and Nate looks around, completely confused as to where they are. They are in a Tibetan village, having crossed from Nepal into Tibet during the train set piece. This entire level is the main example of the contextual gameplay that Naughty Dog decided on, to shift the expectation of the player of what is or not available to them. They wanted the players to explore the village, to interact with the people. While developing, they found that most players just ran for the nearest villager to try to punch them, but realized it wasn't out of malice, but more about testing the game's boundaries. So they figured, what if, when they try to punch the villager and push the button for it, Nathan shook their hand instead, immediately changing the expectation the player has for what Nathan is capable of in the scene, and shifting the context of the exploration for them. The player throughout the story is very much conditioned to rummage, and the only interactions are violent ones. That point of view needs to change for them to appreciate the serenity of this village, the calm way of life that is represented here. That way, when they return in the places under attack, that side carries some emotional weight. Tenzin guides Nathan through the tranquil village to a house where he finds Elena Fisher playing with Pema, the little girl who was right in Nate's face when he woke up, and Tenzin's daughter. Nate is relieved to see Elena, and they share a hug, a painful one given his gunshot. Elena tells him she followed the train's wreckage and wondered what happened. Nathan bitterly tells her she was right about Chloe, that she wasn't up for being rescued. So Elena goes for the logic follow-up question: did Chloe shoot him? But he says no, it was Flynn. Tenzin interrupts them and points to the next room. So Elena tells Nate that someone here wants to talk to him. This is Karl Schaefer, a German man who's been here in this village for a long time, and who is voiced by the late great René Bourgeois. Schaefer is a cheerful and warm man, and he's excited to see Nathan and vigorously shakes his hand, happy that Nathan is doing better. He bids him to sit down so they can talk. He tells Nathan they have a lot in common. He was also carried into the village half dead, and that 70 years prior, in 1939, if we use the game's release date as the in-game year, he was hired to come here with a group of people to find the entrance to Shambala. And that should be all the clues anyone needs. 1939, Germans, a mystical site. There are enough games, movies, and other media that focus on that time period and mysticism that the revelation later on that Schaefer led a group of Nazis to the Himalayas should not come as much of a shock. But it's not mentioned directly in the scene. But if you know, and you can figure it out. I did. I was trained by Wolfenstein and Hellboy, so I know my Nazis and mysticism in fiction. Schaefer opens a nice photo album with pictures from that time period and confirms that the people who hired him, much like Nathan and Lazarevich, were actually after the Chintamani Stone. He asks Nathan where he found the Purba, and Nate replies that Borneo, but why? Schaefer, with the help of Elena, tells him that it's the key to Shambala, the one thing Lazarevich most desperately needs, even if he doesn't know it yet. But Nate corrects him, telling him that Lazarevich is fully aware of that fact. Nathan's been betrayed, shot, exploded, hurled off the side of a mountain, and more, so he tells him he appreciates everything they've done for him, but that he's done with this entire affair. Schaefer gives him an incredulous look and voices his surprise at how defeated Nathan is acting, then asks him if his quest is over. Nathan replies that it is. He's out, but smiling, Schaefer follows with, "What if your quest is only beginning?" Nathan turns to Elena and it's his turn to be incredulous and wondering where the hell this affable German came from. Schaefer laughs, and it's a warm laugh, and he tells Nate that his ego will mend, that this attitude of his is now just because of how lucky he is to be alive, really how close he came to actually being sent to that farm upstate with the rest of the animals and the treasure hunters. But Nate is not having it, and in a moment of tremendous self-reflection, he acknowledges his own reverse Midas touch, explicitly saying that everything he touches turns to crap, and that he's done playing the hero. Schaefer steps closer, telling him that Lazarevich will not give up easily, and that he won't stop until he gets the object of his desire. Nate says, well, more power to him, and Schaefer points out that is exactly the problem. Power. That some of the most ruthless rulers across time have possessed only a fragment of the Chintamani Stone. And he drops a couple of names. Tamerlane, aka Timur, the founder of the Timurid Empire, which ruled over what is today Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, Turkey, and a whole chunk of Central Asia, and is considered one of the greatest military commanders in history. And, Genghis Khan, whose resume is so famous that I just need to say Genghis Khan and you understand what Schaefer is implying here about the danger of someone possessing the whole Chintamani Stone. Nathan thinks this just proves how nuts Lazarevich is, that he's really chasing a mythical power, but Elena tells him, what if it's true? Nate doesn't want to believe it, and despite her not mentioning it directly, her belief in the possibility likely comes from their experience with El Dorado, something else that proved to have more power than anyone realized and posed a greater danger than anyone could fathom. If a golden sarcophagus could hide the Uncharted version of the T-virus, what could the fabled Chintamani Stone do? Schaefer realizes that Nate can't go on their word alone, that he needs proof, so he sends him with Tenzin to find the remains of his expedition, and the proof that what they're talking about is very real. Nate is still not convinced, and he just kinda hopes he lives to regret going, to which Elena gives him a peck on the cheek for good luck, and tells him to come back in one piece. The scene changes to the entrance of a cave system, with what looks like a very ominous "Keep the hell out" sign out front, and it's so serious that Tenzin pulls out his knife, a kukri out of his scabbard and holds it at the ready. This is where Schaefer's exploration party met their end, and we're about to discover there's something going bump in these mountains. In this section, there isn't much to say about Tenzin, not really many insights to be found from his dialogue, as it's mostly, go here, wait there, we'll use this, when picking up the grappling hook, a piece of kit that is first introduced here but wouldn't feature heavily until Uncharted 4, where it proves yet again that any game can be made better by adding a grappling hook. What I will say is that Nate might have a brand new jacket, but he's still in jeans, and this level sees him jump into puddles of frozen water and have the pants caked in snow. And they never acknowledge the fact that he must be freezing his butt off, literally. That, and if you thought the reverse Midas touch was bad, with natural rock formations and ancient architecture, is nothing compared to when Nate meets ice. There are more close calls in this level alone compared to the entire game up to here, but I suppose they had to give Tenzin something to do. The first sign of trouble comes when you run into wolves. You see them in the distance or high up on an icy shelf, and then you hear them cry out in pain and find their remains. Tenzin says something is going on, even claiming that this place might be haunted, and there's a ghost nearby. So when you're attacked by the Yeti-ish creature, which takes a whole lot of bullets to fend off and nearly smashes them both into the snow, Tenzin says, "Told you there was a ghost." Not that they can understand. But this sequence is where you pick up a very notorious pistol from the time period of the expedition, the Luger, widely used by the German army in both world wars. With the creature defeated, sort of, they come to the heart of the cave system, an ancient temple with massive statues and even bigger prayer wheels, not to mention impossibly complicated clockwork mechanisms that require Tenzin and Nate to work together to proceed. It's a kind of mechanism where each participant controls the opposite side of the room, so you have to open the path for Tenzin and then wait for him to return the favor. This is of course further complicated by the greatest curse in all of gaming, the reverse Midas touch. But they persevere, raise platforms that take them into the core of the temple, a room with a stone statue depicting a fierce deity holding the Chintamani Stone. It's also filled with the bodies of soldiers, one of them holding a book bearing the Irminsul, which Nathan calls the Tree of Life. It's a piece of iconography that, along with some of the stuff he finds in the book, confirms that these men were Nazi, and not only that, but they were Schutzstaffel, what's commonly known as the SS. Now, the Irminsul is complicated. There's both a religious and a historical aspect of it. The Irminsul has ties to and is meant to be a representation or approximation of Yggdrasil, the world tree in Norse myth. But it's also a giant wooden pillar, its name being a compound Saxon word that means great pillar. And it was supposedly an actual thing that the king of the Franks, Charlemagne, burned down during the Saxon Wars in the 8th century. So it is kind of correct for Nate to call it the Tree of Life. But I'm not an expert on the subject. This is just what I've been able to find out. If you know more, hit me up in the comments and enlighten me. What is also clear about these men is that they were all executed, likely by Schaefer. The soldiers also have something curious in their possession, a recurring item in the story, the blue resin. Nate gestures to Tenzin that Schaefer shot these men and he doesn't believe it, but Nate says it was the only way to stop them. And remember his dialogue back at the village? The most ruthless rulers have only held a fragment of the stone. He must have feared what could happen if the Nazis got hold of it. So the SS agents had to go. Unfortunately for the two of them, this place is guarded, and two of those Yetis show up and attack them. Nate pulls a lever and makes a platform descend, so they both hold off the creatures until it does, then getting into gear and climb on as it begins to ascend, all the while shooting the seemingly invincible creatures. But once they make it outside, they realize they're only stepped out of the frying pan, as below, the village is on fire. And so we return there, this time not as a visitor, but a savior, helping the locals repel the invaders. Lazarevich went all out on this one, sending in people with grenade launchers, rocket launchers, and even a freaking tank. Seems overkill, but it is Uncharted, where most characters do follow the age-old Mythbusters tenet of if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. The village battle is intense, with countless waves of clone troopers, but also many opportunities to get ahead by going off the beaten path, finding hidden weapons, including one of those miniguns carried by the big lads. The level culminates in you blowing up the tank. Something that always struck me about this level and the first walk through it, when it was still a nice calm place, is that the first time gives you the impression of this being a small village, when in reality it's quite large. When the battle ends, we see Lazarevich's truck convoy depart the village, and we find Pema, who tells them that they took Schaefer. So Nathan and Elena commandeer a truck whose driver was sent to greener pastures, and they give chase, kicking off another set piece, one they would use all over again in the next few entries. I mean, they use it constantly. It's a chase shootout where you jump from one truck to another, taking out enemies along the way, but forced to leave your current vehicle when it catches fire from just how many times it's shot by the clones. At the tail end of the pursuit, Elena and Nathan's truck is forced off a cliff, but they manage to escape the vehicle before it plummets. Fortunately, they were pretty close to their destination, at the dilapidated ancient temple complex. With their enemies thinking that they've been disposed of, the couple has the element surprise, and even catch a glimpse of Schaefer and the Perba being handed to Lazarevich, who drags the old man deeper into the complex. Unfortunately for them, the element of surprise doesn't last all that long, and then they have to contend with a veritable battalion of enemies, coming at them from all directions, with ridiculous firepower and even shooting rockets and placing sniper positions in distant buildings. You may only have missed them by a short amount of time between the end of the chase and now, while Lazarevich's forces have become deeply entrenched in the temple. On the upside, Elena is with you on this level, and if the mooks couldn't handle you alone, they're not ready for what happens when both of you start shooting. There is a saving grace though, dubious as it may be, and it's the Yeti creatures, who are also in this temple and actively engage Lazarevich and his forces, taking out entire squads. At the top of a tower, they find Schaefer, who's been heavily beaten and likely tortured for information. He asks Drake if he found the expedition, and Nathan not only confirms it but both acknowledges and agrees with the actions that Schaefer took, the old man telling him that if those men, the Nazis, had found the stone, it would have changed the course of history. And if we go by actual history, then yeah, that's pretty likely, especially considering what we uncover in Shambala, the truth of what Lazarevich is actually after. Schaefer begs Nathan to take back the Perba, the key to Shambala, find the secret entrance located somewhere in this temple, and then destroy the stone. He's aware that Nathan might not be convinced about the danger the stone poses, so he begs him to believe, and those are his last words as he passes, in pain. And given their situation, they can't even offer him a burial or take him with them. They have to leave him here and move on. Elena questions Nathan, asking if he's now a believer, and Nate is still unsure, but Schaefer believed it, and that is enough for him. Nathan is not about to dismiss this man's dying words, nor his request. Once they leave the tower, they split up, and it's Elena's idea. She's gonna scope out where that hidden entrance might be, while Nate goes after Lazarevich to find the Perba and take it back. He finds Lazarevich arguing with Flynn, tired of his incompetence and his excuses, tired of giving him more and more of his time. Flynn is begging here, telling him the answer he needs is in this room, they just have to figure it out, but Lazarevich is at the end of his patience. He slams the dagger into a pillar, inches from Flynn's head, and says he clearly hired the wrong man for the job, before departing, leaving them there to find the entrance. A clearly shaken Flynn hands Chloe the Perba and tells her to stay and try to figure something out, while he goes to suck up to Lazarevich and maybe stay what is looking like his inevitable execution, one that frankly has been delayed too much. Lazarevich killed one of his men for stealing, and shot Jeff without blinking, and yet he's given Flynn way too many chances. At first I thought he was inconsistent with what his character is supposed to be, as it's proven time and time again that Flynn is, well, an idiot. But he's still an asset. Lazarevich has yet to find Shambala, so he cannot get rid of what's still a possible asset. But he's already made up his mind. As soon as they find Shambala, Flynn is going out. And he's finally reached the point where no matter what Flynn does, it's not gonna change his fate. With Chloe alone in the room, Nathan drops from his vantage point and takes the Perba from her. Whatever warmth there might have been in him towards her is very much cooled, if not entirely chilled. She resists at first, asking how she's supposed to explain the missing purba if he takes it, something that in the past might have given him pause, but not anymore. He says she'll think of something, then adds a little barb, "You always do." Then Chloe, always inscrutable, asks just one thing from Nathan: to take Lazarevich down, which leaves him very confused. After all, she was the one dead set against heroics or saving the day. That must be the effect Lazarevich has on people, I suppose. And as a final testament to Flint's utter idiocy and incompetence, the puzzle in this room is astonishingly simple. It's just putting weights on some pressure plates, and here's the kicker: the plates don't even get pressed unless you place the correct object on them. So even if you don't know the answer, you could just force it through trial and error and find your solution, and Flint couldn't even do that. Lazarevich is right. He hired the wrong man for the job. The puzzle itself is based on the sacred beasts commonly seen in Chinese mythology: the turtle, the tiger, the phoenix, and the dragon, plus the elements they represent, which need to be set in prayer wheels. Nate has the advantage of his notebook with all the information, but given that his notes come primarily from Lazarevich's collections of writings about Shambala and Marco Polo's journals, it's not like Nathan is working with an unfair advantage, other than a working brain. With the puzzle elements set to their correct placements, the center of the room raises an altar for the key, and it opens a metal door up on the tower wall. From it, Nathan can see another part of the complex, a courtyard built on the side of the mountain, filled with statues and what Nate notices to be another receptacle for the key. He contacts Elena and they both make their way there, but it turns out not to be the entrance, but the mechanism to open the door. The real entrance is in a small courtyard that Nathan passed through a couple of times, with a stairway leading up to a small tree. Those stairs sink into the ground, now going down instead of up, and leading to another puzzle chamber. This with a huge blue sphere in the middle, a representation of the Chintamani Stone, and walls decorated with giant purbas as if they were torches, with some of them upside down. When Nate sets them all in the right position, pointing it down, the metal hands grasping the orb rise, revealing a bow under the sphere. Nathan understands immediately, but before he can take action, they hear the sounds of soldiers approaching. Nate takes one of them hostage before the rest of them and Lazarevich enter the room. The warlord is not happy to see Nathan, claiming he should have killed the treasure hunter himself, and yeah, he should have. Going with the Bond villain route never works. He raises his gun at Nathan, but Elena does the same, threatening him. He chuckles, not impressed, and tells her to shoot and see how long they survive if she does. He tells Nathan to open the way, and Nate flips him off. Lazarevich wonders if they're students of history, specifically of why men like Hitler, Pol Pot, Genghis Khan, and Stalin managed to amass the powers they did. Nate very much tells him to get on with it. Lazarevich replies that it's because they were not afraid to do what had to be done, to make the hard choices. And so he blows his own soldiers' brains out, once again leaving Nathan without a bargaining chip. And if anyone still had doubts about this man's views, he clearly says that compassion and mercy are the enemy. He then demands they drop their weapons and kick them away. Lazarevich then threatens Elena, a test of Nathan's will. And the treasure hunter steps in front of his leading lady and tells the bad guy that he's not doing anything if he hurts her. Lazarevich comments on, well, there's an apparent stalemate unless he adds another element to the game, and he calls for Flynn to bring in Chloe, making her stand near Elena and Nathan. Lazarevich says they'll use one as a lesson and the other as a motivator, for Nate to do as he's told. Nathan tells him that he'll do it, but he has to let them both go, and Lazarevich has lost his patience now and snaps back that this is not a negotiation. And I love the intensity Grant McTavish brings to this role, how menacing Lazarevich is. He asks Nate straight up which one of the ladies he would sacrifice, and playfully asks this one or that one, all the while waving the gun around, and this time it's Nate who snaps back, telling him to stop with all the theatrics. He's made his point, and Nate will do what he wants. What Nathan had clearly understood before this drama kicked off was that they would need the resin. In a parallel to their adventure in the museum, he uses Flynn's lighter to ignite the contents of the tin he took from the dead SS soldier that Schaefer executed. The orb in the center of the room acts as a lens for the blue flame, illuminating the walls in the room and showing the place on a wall on the opposite side where the Purba must be used to open the way. With a key used, the entire wall sinks into the floor, showing a massive cavernous room ahead, with rotating platforms and the walls lined with giant statues of fierce deities. On the other side of the room is a door leading further into the complex. As Lazarevich steps forwards, the platforms rotate out of alignment, so there is no longer a bridge for them to reach the other side. Angry, Lazarevich sends Flynn and Nathan to fix it. There is a little secret in this sequence. If you attempt to punch Flynn, he knocks Nathan to the ground with a warning. If you try a second time, he shoots Drake. As another parallel to their museum level, this sequence has Flynn and Nate working together to move across the environment and reach their destination. Only the chemistry is completely different, full of bitterness on Nate's side and a condescendingly mocking tone from Flynn. The useless one in the duo knows he's got Lazarevich's backing and so takes every opportunity to flaunt his new power and authority, using it to get even with the guy who showed him up every single time so far. Nate, of course, being the mature one, responds with a few yo mama jokes. Classy. Together they reach a room with a giant door and more of those giant prayer wheels. Nate turns them to the right positions and raises a capstan, one of those wheel-like cranks with handles that are all over adventure games and especially Uncharted. Capstan is a term used on ships, and they're meant for rigging and raising the anchor. If you've seen the second movie in the Pirates of the Caribbean series, it's the thing they turn to summon the Kraken. Some ancient millstones also use the same design, which is why Flynn makes a joke about them milling wheat. As they finish churning it, Flynn notices the sound of rushing water, and we see it pour from the faces of the fierce deities lining the walls. The water used to turn those rotating platforms back into alignment. Unfortunately, this also triggers the Yeti security squad, and two of them, likely the same two seen in the monastery, come looking for Flynn and Nathan. Nate gets a gun from the other guy, and they fight the two off for a while, but it's almost like they're impervious to bullets, until Lazarevich steps into the room, takes his sawed-off shotgun, and blasts them both dead, taking their masks off to reveal men with blue skin and black teeth. We've seen other people with black teeth before, Marco Polo's crew that killed each other, and we kinda know what's blue around here. So yes, this is your next clue on what the resin does to people. And if you've put the pieces together, you can figure out what Lazarevich is actually after. Not a gemstone, but the source of this power. I do love the fact that Lazarevich in this instance acts like a psychotic Scooby-Doo character, taking the mask off the monster. But with the way open, Lazarevich says it's the end of the line, but he won't let Flynn take the shot on Nathan just yet. He wants Nate to see Shambala and die knowing that Lazarevich has taken it, which, is a dumb plan, and it's proven to be so the moment they step out and see this gorgeous city in all of its splendor. I gotta give it to Naughty Dog. The design of Shambala is breathtaking. But it also raises some questions. This thing is very much inside a sizable valley in the Himalayas, and you're gonna tell me no one picked this thing up with like some satellite imagery? I can't believe this thing would have still remained a mystery in the modern era. In any case, the millisecond they step outside, Lazarevich orders his captives on their knees. Flynn intercedes for Chloe's life. At first, the warlord is not having it. He's not one to suffer traitors. But then Flynn throws out a comment very much implying that Lazarevich has no shot of finding the stone without him, so he better keep his end of the deal. Lazarevich acquiesces and shoves Chloe in Flynn's direction. But you can tell Lazarevich is doing the mental math on how many rounds he'll need to fire to get rid of Flynn. Nate and Elena try to fight off their executioners, and to their fortune, and which proves that the whole thing of no, "We're gonna wait to kill you until just a little bit later" was a dumb plan because it leaves you open to surprises, the Super Smurfs appear, using some frankly overpowered crossbows to mow down Lazarevich's forces. Chloe, Nathan, and Elena use this chance to run away from their enemies, with Nate's reverse Midas touch coming in for a clutch save when it makes the platform break off from its original position and ride down the side of the mountain until they crash at a spot far below and away from Lazarevich and his crew. At the bottom, they gather what weapons they can from what looks like prior expeditioners. Chloe is ready to split, wanting nothing but to return to the entrance and leave this place in the rearview mirror. But Nate and Elena are not in for that. They want to stop Lazarevich and fulfill Schaefer's last request. And it's another tug-of-war scene where Chloe is all about her own survival, her own interests, while the other two are heading in a more heroic direction, and their points of view and moral compasses come into stark contrast. But, seeing as the alternative would be to cross Shambala on her own, Chloe relents and agrees to go with them to save the world. A particular dialogue that I love from this scene is Chloe's incredulity at the notion of some mystical power or weirdness going on here, only for Elena to point out that they're standing in freaking Shambala, and Nate mentioning how many bullets they spent on the guards, making it clear that there's more than enough proof that there's something strange in the neighborhood. As soon as they're done, they're beset by the Blue Man group, and after you dabba-dee-dabba-da them and take their uber-powerful crossbows, the group makes it through the city, fighting off enemies on all fronts, culminating in a large courtyard where they fight off waves of Lazarevich's men, including the chain gun-carrying heavies, only for the final wave to be this group of Ultramarines. And while there are still some battles along the way, they pale in comparison to the courtyard fight. And that's including a big fight where, much like in Uncharted 1, you find yourself in the middle of a conflict between both sets of enemies. And there's no enemy of my enemy, no. Here, everybody's fair game for everyone else. But with the enemies sent to meet their makers, the group arrives at the main temple room, the one holding the Chintamani Stone, and Nate finally realizes the truth and the connection between the resin and the stone. The resin is the stone. The Chintamani Stone is not a sapphire, it's amber, it's tree sap. And in the distance, there's a giant life tree, where Lazarevich is heading to get the sap from its raw source. Flynn stumbles near them, congratulating Nathan on putting it all together. He's hurt, shot. Turns out his usefulness for Lazarevich finally ran its course, and the warlord left him to die. And honestly, it took Lazarevich way too long to do this. Elena tries to reach him, but Flynn mocks her, telling her this is not a movie, and she's not the plucky lady who's going to reform the villain at the last second. And then two things become readily apparent. The first is Lazarevich's parting gift for Flynn, a grenade with a pin pulled, Flynn's grip on it being the only thing keeping it from exploding. And the second is just how petty Flynn is, as he only drops the grenade when Elena is close to him, likely in one final attempt to take someone with him, or to take someone from Nathan. Elena is badly hurt, but still alive, but the pain and her injuries make it impossible for her to move on her own. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves loves to draw parallels between events occurring now and those from previous levels. And so in this moment, as another parallel to previous levels, Chloe carries Elena like Nate did with Jeff, while Drake fights off a few more waves of Lazarevich's men. The last few on his payroll, I suppose. The rest having gone to greener pastures already. When they reach the end of this sequence, Nate tells Chloe to take Elena back to the entrance and get out, while he heads for Lazarevich. Chloe makes one final attempt to convince him otherwise, pointing out that it's suicide. But Nate is not to be deterred. The possibility of Lazarevich becoming immortal is too much of a threat. Elena is barely conscious at this point, but I'm certain that if she could speak, she would agree with Nathan's actions. Nathan heads for the base of the tree, where a pool of fresh sap can be found. Its consistency almost like water. He sees Lazarevich step forward and drink some of it, which heals the gnarly scars on the sides of his face and body, a sign of the regenerative properties of this substance. The warlord then notices Nathan and stops the few men he has left from shooting him, saying he wants to kill him personally. Nate is not up for it and shoots the sap, igniting it and triggering the boss fight. The trek through the city had proved that the resin in its raw form is highly unstable and goes up explosively with even a single gunshot. This boss fight, compared to the final encounter in the first Uncharted, is a vast improvement, but it still has a lot of frustrating aspects, and I would not call it a good boss fight. Lazarevich can't be shot or hurt in conventional means. The only way to hurt him is to detonate the tree sap when he's close. Each time an explosion triggers near Lazarevich, he gets angrier. He continuously walks like the killer in a slasher movie, just striding forward towards Nate, hurling grenades in his path, or using his shotgun when close enough. It's an encounter that starts out simple, but every phase of it gets progressively harder. But by the end, the explosions have weakened Lazarevich enough that he stumbles. Nathan approaches, his gun raised and about to shoot him, with Lazarevich taunting him to do it. No compassion or mercy. But Nate looks past him and sees another set of Smurfs coming their way, so Nate lowers his gun. Lazarevich mocks him and says he doesn't have the will to pull the trigger. And Nate says that maybe he doesn't, but the Ultramarines there most certainly do, and runs away as the Blue Man Group take Lazarevich and likely rip him apart limb by limb. But Lazarevich points out something interesting. Something that Nathan might not be ready to face, and which will only become more apparent in time as the series progresses. That Lazarevich and Nathan are just the same. They both kill those in their way, and he asks Nathan how many people has he put down to get here. Sure, you could argue it's self-defense, but when the body count is over 100, their argument starts looking a little flimsy. Nate might be the hero of our story, but he's also a stone-cold killer when he has to be. But this is Uncharted, and this is Nathan Drake. The game can't just end with a boss fight. No. Of course, the explosion at the heart of the tree has a catastrophic effect on the rest of the city, and everything collapses around him. Another set piece where the floor crumbles behind you, the perspective shifting from regular camera to crash cam and then back again. He meets up with Chloe near the entrance, and there's one last threat. A Smurf lying there unconscious suddenly wakes up and grabs Chloe, as support to the platform they're on collapses and they, along with Nathan, slide towards the abyss. You have to shoot him off her before you reach the edge, at which point Chloe shoves the Ultramarine off her. Nate goes over the edge, hanging for dear life until it breaks away, but Chloe catches Drake's hand and pulls him up. Together, carrying Elena, they leave Shambala behind and head back to the Tibetan village, where they lay Schaefer to rest properly. Chloe approaches Nathan and he tells her she should play the hero more often, that it suits her. But she's not interested, it's not her thing. She then turns a bit more serious and asks Nathan if he loves Elena, and he's about to apologize, thinking it's got something to do with his relationship and feelings for Chloe, but she tells him it's fine, but to not be an idiot and actually tell the girl how he feels. He's about to say something else, but Chloe shakes her head and tells him it's her turn to walk away, a reference to that conversation earlier in the game where she says it was Nate that walked away from their relationship. In the background, we see our good friend Sully help Elena to walk, and they approach Nathan. They both tell Elena she sucks as a patient, too stubborn, but she corrects them. She's not stubborn, just restless. Sully turns to Nate and asks, "So, no Sapphire?" And Nate says, "No, it was just a metaphor," which Sully laments because those don't pay the bills. Nate says something will come up, they just gotta have faith in it. To which Sully retorts with one of my favorite lines in all of Uncharted: "Faith and a quarter will give you 25 cents. Sully wants to know where Chloe went, so Nate points him in her direction, and he heads after her, with Nate calling out that Sully's a dirty old man. Not the first time that's been said to him, and not gonna be the last. Nate takes out the clasp from Schaefer's cloak and puts it on the monument in front of them, where Tenzin had been shown praying earlier. Elena takes his arm and says he did good, and that Schaefer would approve. Elena wonders where they go from here, and Nate says he doesn't know, before leaning in and having that kiss they didn't have at the end of the previous game. Only this time it's sunset in a Tibetan village with the majesty of the Himalayas before them. A step up in terms of romantic settings for the two of them. Nate confides that he hasn't thought far enough ahead to know what he's gonna do. Elena admits that neither has she. She then asks him on a scale of 1 to 10 how scared he was that she was going to die, and he drops a 4, and Elena is offended by it, and very incredulous, claiming that Nate was almost crying, that's at least an 8. Nate refutes this and says the Guardian things, the Smurfs, those were an 8. So Elena asks the important question, what's a 10? And it's obviously clowns. They continue this back and forth as the camera pans out for the end of the story. And so ends Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. A title that speaks both of the honor among members of the profession and also the expectations of untrustworthiness and shifting moralities and allegiances that come with dealing with thieves. This is the end of this look into Uncharted 2, but join me in the next entries as we explore the search for Iram in the Pillars in Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception.